Welcome back, everyone, to this, the fifth episode? Yes, fifth episode? Yeah. Of Blue Collar, White Collar, with me, Kieran, and my co-host, Nicholas Wheeler-Hughes. Nicholas, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. It is very nearly the new year. I'm excited for everything that 2025 holds, though it's going to be pretty wild in Canada. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, we're likely going to be having, or we are going to be having an election this year no matter what, so it'll be interesting to see when that takes place, if that takes place, and how that takes place. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, I have a bit of a curveball up my sleeve compared to what we usually talk about. Nick doesn't even know. Nick, do you think you know what we're talking about today?
I thought it was going to be like Canadian politics.
No, we're taking a break from politics because it's December. We're stepping away from that. We're going to be a little bit more philosophical today, but...
Okay. Hit me.
Okay. So, many people today talk about the boy crisis, masculinity is in sort of a place that people really don't know what to do with it. Lots of people talk about toxic masculinity. You have young boys joining gangs. You have all sorts of issues with teenage boys these days. And I think that we should take examples from quality literature in ways to... At least these young men should take these lessons from certain films, certain books, and, learn how to build a tonic masculinity, for example. The good parts of what makes men, the things that make us not just a negative in society, And today we're going to be talking about it through the lens of The Lord of the Rings. Because I think there's one character in particular in Lord of the Rings who exemplifies the best characteristics of masculinity. Nick, do you know who that is?
Is it Aragorn?
Of course it's Aragorn. Aragorn is a god amongst men.
Is it Frodo?
It's definitely not Frodo. I mean, you can make Gandalf an argument, but no, it's of course Aragorn, man. He's the fucking man. So what do you think? I've dropped that on you.
Well, first of all, I dig this topic. Masculinity has actually been something that I've been thinking about, particularly post-Trump win, because as we talked about last time, the big demographic that Trump won overwhelmingly in 2024 was men. And he performed better with men than he did in 2016 or 2020. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. People say, oh, he went on Joe Rogan and Kamala Harris didn't. And that's why so many men voted for him. No, it goes far beyond that, but that's an interesting place to start, right? If you want to talk about it through the lens of Lord of the Rings, which is cool, which I'm down.
Lord of the Rings, and we can expand that to other platforms, because there are other characters who exemplify.
But I wonder whether we're going to have similar perspectives here, because I actually am coming at this from, well, I'm thinking about this in my own way. Not I was about to say from the left, but that's not necessarily true. Although I do think that politics has played a major role in how masculinity has evolved and how young men understand masculinity today. So yeah, I'm super keen to talk about it, but not totally sure where you want to start. I think you kind of have to.
Well, I'll just start off by riffing off what you said. Yeah, it's masculinity in ways is downstream from, people these days, lots of people will say that politics is downstream from culture, and that the culture shapes the politics, but in a certain way it also feeds the other direction, whereas the politics feeds and drives the culture. It is a two-way street. And yeah, 100% young men is what swung that election for Donald Trump because, well, anyway, there's lots of reasons. That's not the point. But I want to just take examples from The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to plug it every chance I get. So I see a lot of problems with young men in society. You know, where not just men, but in general, young youth are, you know, they're having less sex, which is a strange thing for someone who's typically on the right to be concerned about. But it's not just that, you know, they're not getting driver's licenses. They stay inside. You know, there's skyrocketing levels of depression amongst the youth. And
Well,
I think
yeah.
I think the thing that they need is something that J.R.R. Tolkien has written about extremely well, and I think that's adventure. I think men specifically, some women as well. It's just they typically have a different adventure that they take, but men need an adventure. They need something to do in their life that is interesting, that drives them, some sort of quest that they feel they have to accomplish. Do you agree?
I think that's true of all people. I don't think that's true of men
It's
specifically.
the thing is men, if they do not have that, they devolve into creatures that are incredibly toxic to the societies that they live in. Women, where they do it,
Again, I think it's true for women as
it's
well.
not nearly in the same aspect. If you look at the levels of crime, like it's the people who commit crime overwhelmingly is young men. And most of the time it's because they don't have the thing that they need most in life, which is a purpose to not do those things or do those things
Right.
to the right people.
Okay, so then let's rewind. What is one of the biggest trends that is happening among men in the West? But we can talk about, you know, Canada and the States specifically, is in education, right? We are seeing that men are enrolling less in kind of traditional education. They are dropping out more frequently and earlier than they used to. They are getting poorer grades. If you look at the kind of split now in universities, it's something like 60-40.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
I believe it's higher
So,
than the levels that made them want to introduce programs that
yeah.
promoted more women in.
Absolutely, and it's like I also think that there's kind of this this idea that because if you look at, you know, kind of the major positions of power in our society, that they are still held by men, right? Canada has never had, aside from a very brief
We
Kim
talked about
Campbell,
this.
Canada elects men as our prime ministers, right? Most of our big corporations are run by men. Most of our provinces are headed by premiers who are men. So I think that when you look at where power resides, most of it is still held by men. That's a fact. But if we kind of look further, or at least to younger folks, I think that the trend is actually going in a direction that we should be worried about for opposite reasons. In the sense that we are seeing, to your point, that there is, you know, young men are finding themselves without purpose. They're finding themselves isolated. They're finding that they can't successfully go on dates, right? Like I know that you know, in the States, that there's this whole thing about how women are refusing to go out with men who support Trump, and I get that from a woman's perspective, given, you know, the way that Trump thinks and talks about women and acts towards women. So I get that, but also it leaves men who maybe are feeling like there is no place for them in a society run by a Democratic black woman president to vote for Trump, and as a result, it kind of creates this tension, right? This tension between men and women. So there is a crisis happening among boys and men. The way that we talk about masculinity can often be very binary, where we talk about it either as you are, a good, respecting feminist, or you're kind of this asshole, douchey alpha type, right? And actually, it's a much wider spectrum. But it's true that men are now flocking to these alternative spaces where they feel much more comfortable, right? Like we've talked about the podcasts, but like, if you look at the viewership of some of the biggest podcasts, Joe Rogan being the biggest one, but like Theo Vaughn is another one that comes to mind, right? It's just like guys like being guys. I listen to the Pete and Sebastian show, two comedians, hilarious, and they're just like they're two dudes who are shooting the shit, and it's hilarious. And it reinforces certain ideas of what masculinity should be. And if we go back to Aragorn, Aragorn is the I kick ass, I have a sword, I become the king, like I'm a leader, right? It's very much this kind of like, and don't get me wrong, Aragorn's a wonderful, wonderful man, but he also is created to fit many of the stereotypes of what men are supposed to be.
Stereotype. It's about archetypes. Aragorn is the man that every man should desire themselves to be. He achieves his goals. He goes above and beyond to help other people. One of the things that makes Aragorn king is not his blood lineage, which of course it does matter, yes, in the sense of actually becoming king. It's not that he's the best in combat. It's not that he killed the most orcs. It's the thing that establishes him as the king, in that he is a warrior and a healer. The fact that he helps people, is compassionate, is a loving man. All these things are what men should want to be. You do have to be able to defend yourself in life, but you should also be able to care for other people. And that's the thing that he exemplifies most of any of the characters in, Boromir is a kick-ass soldier. Legolas is a badass. Like they're all, but Aragorn is the only one that really has a love interest in the story, but one that he's, well, not just he. Anyway, I'm rambling on at this point.
A love interest whose character is based entirely on her relationship to Aragorn.
Well, that's
right.
Only a
Aragorn is
the
protagonist.
This is you're already centering 9 characters in, what's like 1,000, 1,500 pages at the most. She's a tiny That's not what matters in the book. It's an aspect of his character, and he is only an aspect of the story. You can't write 40 multi-dimensional characters in a story.
I take issue though, and I agree that Aragorn's the fucking man. He's awesome. But also, and again, I'm just gonna, I think, be disagreeing with you where, because that's how we have a discussion, and I'm not disagreeing with everything you're saying, but if Aragorn is the guy to aspire to be, right? It very much suggests that you need to be like the traditional man of the house, right? And that your partner, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, is very much kind of dependent on you. Arwen, her entire character, right? Her entire story is about deciding whether or not to become mortal and live alongside Aragorn and die alongside Aragorn, as opposed to marrying him and watching him age while she remains immortal. And the thing that she does is the most incredible thing that anyone can do for love, which is sacrifice immortality, right? So it's this incredible choice. But Aragorn exists in a far greater context beyond Arwen, right? And yes, he's the main character, so I get it. And you could probably tell a whole other story about Arwen.
Considering how
but
old she is.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that I think a lot of men now, and men always, but I think that's something that we should strive to at least consider and, in my opinion, move away from. Not away from, but that it should not be the only way for a household to be run, which is the idea that the man is the head of the household.
Listen,
A man
you're talking about a
provides.
story that was written almost 100 years ago. You
I
can't
know. Well, then
expect feminist narrative.
don't take Aragorn as like the best guy, and then say, "Oh, it was
because
written 100 years ago."
You're building a whole establishment around something that was a base assumption 100 years ago and 10,000 years before that. When I'm talking about a well-written character who shows all the great
and I agree with you
aspects that a person should want for themselves, that a person should not want for themselves for the entire world to be different than it is, because you can't change the entire world, but you can change yourself. And if every man in the world was as honest and caring and reliable and self-sacrificial as Aragorn, the world would be an incredible place to live in. Period.
Run entirely by men.
No,
with women very much secondary.
He is willing to give women more autonomy
give women as though
any other character.
Give the women.
Yes, in basically 3,000. Well, no, it's probably like if the stories existed, it'd probably be like 800 years ago. Women did not have the same freedoms as everyone else. It sucked. Guess what? That's different now. Point being, in his time, he gave women more autonomy. Like, he believed in Arwen when she decided to fight on the battlefield. That was the most progressive fucking thing that a man could do in that time.
Arwen?
No. Is it? The two love interests he has are they're too close of a name. Okay, the blonde lady from Rohan.
Eowyn.
Yes. Okay, you're right. Yeah. It is. Arwen is elf lady.
And actually, no one gives her permission. She just breaks the rules and goes anyway.
Give her permission, but he could stop her. He could turn her in. And is that not, in a way, giving someone permission if you let them do it? When you could physically stop them? Do you think if she wanted to go and Aragorn said, "Nah, you ain't," she would be able to? No. He's fucking Aragorn. Jaime Lannister would have his ass kicked, George R.R. Martin.
Again, the framing of your question is one that I take issue with, which is men letting women do things.
This is...
Sorry, I'm going to be that guy. You want to have that discussion? I'm going to be that guy. Right? Because I, frankly, like, I'm someone who believes...
It's not his...
Yes, it's medieval. It's medieval. It's a male-dominated world. Absolutely.
She go on her own? Yes, 100%. She makes the decision to go, and she goes. But guess what? He's okay with that, and that's what I'm trying to say. So if you want a character who is pro-female freedom in those stories, it's fucking Aragorn. If Aragorn existed today, he would not want women to not have access to birth control, and he would want women to be a part of society in the way that they are now, which have equal fucking rights as everyone else.
Aragorn is pro-choice?
I didn't say that. I don't know that. But I said he would be okay with women having access to contraception. Because contraception is 100% of a different conversation than the right to access to abortion, whether or not you're on either side of that.
Yeah. And nothing that we can get into. Let's pivot back. And I hear what you're trying to say, and I'm giving you a bit of a hard time. And I agree that, again, Aragorn has, incredible qualities, and he's even cooler in the book. Just for anyone who's only who's only watched the movies and not read the books, read the books, because Aragorn is like even more like the man in the books.
It's true, and that whole story about him being a healer, they touch upon it in the movies, but it's
He
so
just
much more
rubs some
important.
water on Eowyn's forehead after she fights the Witch King.
No, he does some stuff with herbs, but you don't really think of that as like a healer, like in the same way that in the end of Return of
He
the
tries to
King.
help Frodo a little bit too,
Yeah,
but ultimately Eowyn shows up, brings him to Rivendell, and then ultimate healer Elrond fixes him up real good.
the stuff about him being a healer is much more relevant in the books, and which is why I said based off of the literature, not off the movies that we're. I could have busted out my movies too because I got those as well. Anyway, but it's not just about Aragorn. It's about the adventure, because as I was speaking to your father earlier, I said men need a purpose in life and women need a purpose in life, but today we're talking about masculinity, and so I'm referring to men. And if men don't have a purpose, they go awry in life, and it's has much worse outcomes than when women do. You end up with white nationalist groups growing. You end up with
Totally
increasing jihad. People from the UK becoming Islamic terrorists. You have gangs.
Did you know?
Um,
Did you know that the Boy Scouts of America was founded after World War II, when they had basically seen lots of young men flocking to far right causes, particularly Nazism, and the United States basically realized, oh no, this could happen here, where we could have some fascist leader rise up, and young men would flock to that leader. Let's start something where we teach boys at a young age about things like respect, right? Honesty, caring for each other, like all these kind of really great fundamental. There's a Scouts code. It's like 4 words. I don't know what it is. I never did Scouts. But the idea was we need to basically ensure that boys do not kind of fall off the ladder, so to speak. They are not allowed to, en masse, find themselves lonely, uneducated, without money, and therefore, very dangerous to society, right?
There's one thing I want to point out that you're missing, and I want you to continue after this. Male role models. Men need male role models.
Absolutely true.
Like your father.
And what has happened, what I think has happened is that we have actually seen an erosion of that, where people, specifically young people, are now far less, they're participating far less in kind of the real world, and they're on their phones, right? And we kind of haven't touched on the role of phones, social media specifically, in the way that young people in general, right, men and women, see themselves. But the message that is being conveyed to men on social media platforms is really bad. It's really bad, and I have social media and I see it, and it's unbelievable, right? Like you're gonna see videos where a girl is approached on the street, and she's asked, like, what's a turnoff in a guy, right? And she'll say something like, oh, if he like treats me with respect. Like, those kinds of videos are everywhere, right? And so what do we learn from that? If I'm a young man who doesn't know anything, I'm 14 years old and I'm trying to get a girlfriend, oh, she wants me to be like, kind of mean to her, kind of degrading, that will get me girls. That's the message that a lot of boys are getting, right?
There's absolutely a lot
so
of terrible role
seeing,
models and videos on the internet. I'm not going to disagree with you about that, but the landscape is
brutal.
so much. It's terrible on both sides, because if you go over to like, if you dive into the right leaning sphere as a young guy, you end up seeing a lot of those videos, and I can't stand those videos. My brother would send me some videos of things, and I'm just like, I'm not going to watch this. I know I disagree. Anyway, but if you go into a lot of left-wing spheres on the internet, you also find a lot of shit-talking of men, and that makes
yes,
that drives them back the other way.
Yeah.
and that
You know what I see a
it's a
lot? You know
cycle
what I
that
see a lot?
it's a cycle
Okay.
that is just awful for young men to live in, and they need better role models.
Yeah. One thing that I find frustrating um, is that there's a lot of men are so simple. All they want is this, right? And it's like, actually, that's not true at all. Men are people, and people are complicated. And to say, oh, men just want to come home and open a beer and watch TV until they have to wake up tomorrow and go to work again, um, is so degrading to men.
Right.
And so, my problem is as much with the left as the right on this, where there's a lot of degrading of men. There's a lot of kind of like guilty until proven innocent. If you are a man, a white man, a straight white man, and those are that happens to be you and I, my friend. And
Well, I don't know
you know,
about that.
as someone who treads in a lot of progressive spaces, there have been times when I've been, very aware that, I'm, very, very aware of my identity. I suppose I could say. Um, Now, do I have privileges? Absolutely. There are absolutely things that come with being white, that come with being male, right? That come from growing up in, a family that has done pretty well, right? A family that is that I feel very fortunate to be a part of, right? So those are all privileges that I have and I'm aware of, and try to be cognizant of. But at the same time, I think that like this idea of men being the bad guy automatically is frustrating when you are, someone who does their best anyway to have empathy, to be respectful, to really enter into equal partnerships, in the way that I try to. But at the same time, a lot of those feelings, I think people, particularly women, who have had so many negative experiences with men who are being fed all this crap that we talk about, it is kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where the more men kind of feel like, oh, you're just an asshole, the more you're going to flock to these alternative spaces where you only then become more of an asshole, right? So it's very tricky, and I think that to your point, we need better role models. Like we need men who are really standing up, and but there's all kinds of
There's tons of them.
of role models, right? There's
Tons.
all kinds of role models and all kinds of different men, right? You
And
can be,
the great
can
thing
be
about the great thing about literature and even film and television is you can take lessons from characters who are not perfect characters. You can take lessons from the people who make mistakes in other ways, and you just don't follow those mistakes. And you can take lessons from the people who are flawed in different aspects and learn from those ones. So it's
yeah. You know who I'm a big fan of right now?
who?
Andrew Garfield. Do you know who that is?
Well, yeah, he used to be Spider-Man.
He used to be Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But he's been in all kinds of stuff. And he did a new movie recently called We Live in Time with Florence Pugh. Pretty good movie. I saw it. It was okay. But the promo that he was doing for the movie, when he was kind of doing different media, he did this podcast that I remember. It's a New York Times podcast called Modern Love. And I listened to the episode, and it was so cool because basically what the podcast format is that the guests, the people who are being interviewed, are offered different essays to read prior to the podcast. They choose one of 5, I think they're offered, and then they read that essay out loud. And all the essays are kind of on a specific topic. Anyway, Andrew Garfield picked his essay, and it's this story about this couple who adopts a kid from a faraway place who are and who's having a lot of issues. Anyway, that's not important. What's important is that Andrew Garfield, in the middle of the podcast, in the middle of reading, because they do a bit of an interview before, they do an interview after, and the kind of reading of the essay is in the middle. He's reading the essay, and at one point he like pauses, and he starts to cry. Basically, he's so deeply touched by what he was reading out loud that he started to cry. And I thought that was beautiful. It was very authentic. It wasn't staged. And she kind of asks him, are you okay? Do you want to stop? And he goes, no, it's, I want to keep going. I just feel so moved by what I'm reading. And that for me was just this like beautiful example of how men, and don't get me wrong, Andrew Garfield's like awesome, right? Like everyone he's very well liked. He used to be Spider-Man, but again, he's in a lot of other stuff. And he's the kind of man who I think needs to be among the range of men who are available as role models, because this is a guy who is not the tough guy, not the alpha, right? I hate this alpha culture bullshit that's happening right now, right? I'm an alpha. I go to the gym and I just, this alpha, right? I hate that. And whenever I meet someone like that, I don't engage with them because I really have very little to say. I think that your values are quite warped.
Okay, I have no problem if that's the kind of thing you want to do. Go to the gym, exercise, be healthy. Usually it's when that portion of their personality, the alpha portion, as you're talking about, when that is it is irritating. I don't.
The person needs to have all the attention, right? To be the loudest in the room, to be very central, right? And that actually, I think that shows a lot of insecurity. But the point that I'm just trying to make here is that this is a guy who's willing to cry, right? To actually cry, not in a character, but as him, right? Andrew Garfield, the actor, was willing to publicly cry about something that made him feel emotional, and I think that's important, right? Does that make him any less of a man? Absolutely not. In fact, I think it makes him more of a man because he is a human being who is in touch with his emotions, right? And again, I'm not saying that that's how all men need to be, but I'm saying that his example needs to be in the range of examples that young men are seeing as being okay, right? And Andrew Garfield is a heartthrob, right? Like tons of, well, not to you, but to many. And I think that's a positive thing.
No, I agree 100%. But the thing is it's, I see that as a sign of self-confidence, and that's something these young men are lacking.
Yeah.
The fact that he feels comfortable enough with himself, knowing that what he has inside him, what he has is, he's not worried about crying in front of potentially hundreds of thousands, millions of people.
Right.
He's not afraid of that ruining him.
Appearing weak.
Exactly. And that is a level of self-confidence that these young men need to learn, because that's the problem. None of these, I have friends, we're in our 30s. I have friends who've never really gone on dates, and that's quite sad. I'm not going to name any names. I feel bad for you for even bringing it up. You know who you are. If you're listening to this, I apologize.
You are a loser. That's not very nice.
I'm not trying to point. Anyway, this is coming across wrong.
You might have to clip that out.
If anyone hasn't figured out, Nick and I, we were supposed to do this podcast inebriated, but one of us couldn't do it.
Try to guess which.
Anyway, point being is that because these young men have never been shown how to do things by a real man, by someone who can teach them the best lessons of how to be a good man, they don't have it in them to be willing to be vulnerable like that, because they don't have the self-confidence, and because they're not willing to be vulnerable, they try and be hard, and they try and they put out in the world a more toxic side of the person they could be. And
who's a dope male role model in Lord of the Rings? Theoden King. I will tell you why.
He's pretty good. Lay down your case for me.
3 reasons. 1, he weeps for his son. We actually don't think. I don't think we see Aragorn ever weep.
No, I believe he sheds tear, but
When
something sad is happening. I don't remember.
I don't think Aragorn actually is a very emotional character. He's very kind of strong and
He's stoic.
determined. I
He's
don't think there's a bit of self doubt there.
he's a
And
stoic character. He
lots of
keeps his
compassion.
emotions to himself. So that doesn't mean he doesn't feel them. And there's a difference in that.
True.
Continue.
Theoden 1. There's the scene where he's weeping at the grave of his son, right? With Gandalf there. He's not weeping alone. He's weeping in front of, this great wizard. And I think that was a beautiful scene. 2, he names Eowyn as his heir, right? He basically says to her, and he kind of is preparing her throughout the movies, throughout the books, but ultimately it could have gone to Eomer, the head of the Rohirrim or whatever, in Two Towers. He's a badass too. But ultimately Theoden names his niece, if I'm not mistaken, Eowyn, to be the next leader of Rohan, which I think is pretty cool. And the third one, what was the third one? Well, the third one is that he admits that ultimately it was not Theoden, but Aragorn who won them the Battle of Helm's Deep, right? Because at the very end there, he says, "Ride out with me." Obviously, it's actually Gandalf who won that battle by bringing them back. Let's all be honest.
Bringing a fuck ton of horsemen.
But like Aragorn is the leader, kind of throughout, right? Like Theoden just stays in one place. Aragorn's there, right? He's in the thick of it. So you can make a case for Aragorn and Gandalf kind of leading the forces to victory. But Theoden admits this, right? He kind of doesn't pretend in the way that so many men do these days, right? Kind of grandstanding this shell of superiority that so many men project. And he admits it was not Theoden, but Aragorn who saved our people. And what's cool in the end is that Aragorn ascends to the throne of Gondor, but really he's like the king of the world, right? He's the top dog. So all to say that there's a lot of cool characters. The Frodo and Sam relationship, we haven't talked about that, but like Samwise Gamgee, dude, that's a man. That's a man. Why?
100%.
Because he stood by his friend.
Yes, I agree with you 100%.
Whole way.
He doesn't just stand by his friend. He fucking carries him.
That's right.
And
that's right.
That is another aspect, another portion of masculinity that is important. Men need those bonds of platonic friendship. A lot of people.
Wink, wink.
No. A lot of people like to talk about, Sam and Frodo are obviously gay, but they couldn't write it back then. But if not being able to know the love of another man without it being a homosexual thing is incredibly sad. Like you and I have a bond together.
Totally. These guys are brothers. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a brotherhood without the blood relation, and it's a thing that boys need, and that's why it's important that kids are a part of a team at some point in their lives, because you need to develop those relationships, and you need to get better at developing those relationships.
Yep.
Did you go dark?
All right. Just let me see what's going on here.
Interesting.
You can keep talking though. Keep talking. I'll fix. There we go.
No, just unplug.
There we go.
Oh, you lost my train of thought.
Let me jump in.
Please do.
Merry and Pippin, also very interesting stories of masculinity, right? Because you can kind of think of the hobbits as children, right? In like the real world, where like, yes, it's true that they're adults in small bodies, but the way that they are treated among the fellowship is as children, right?
100%.
There are the 5 adults and the 4 kids, the 4 hobbits, and the 5 adults need to transport the 4 kids to Mordor, At least that's the initial idea.
Well, they're Frodo, but they're all along for the ride.
Right, exactly. But what happens obviously is that Merry and Pippin, they get separated, but they're still being cared for kind of the whole way, right? They need to be cared for first by the Fellowship, with Pippin especially making all kinds of ruckus.
He's a lot better in the books. He's a vital part of them getting out of the Shire in the Fellowship of the Ring books.
Okay. Pippin actually doesn't do anything until the third movie. But then they're taken care of by Treebeard in Two Towers, and finally, when they're separated, when Gandalf takes Pippin to Gondor while Merry stays in Rohan with Éowyn, I suppose you could say, they both kind of come into themselves, right? They kind of both have this awakening. Merry, you can argue, was already a little bit more self-assured because of what happens at the Entmoot. But really, both of them kind of come into their own.
They become men.
And especially Pippin, right? Pippin offering his service
to
Denethor. Yeah, exactly. Not men in the, we are the strongest, most badass guys around, but we're fighting for something, right? We have purpose.
When I say man, I mean the Aragorn. I know this is just the Lord of the Rings box, but I mean the vision of masculinity that I'm talking about as Aragorn peak man. Like it's not just Aragorn. There's a bunch of examples. But yes, they're turning into good men.
Yeah, exactly. I still wonder, though. I still think that you and I do have different. Let me ask you this, because this is a question that I've asked a lot of kind of younger men that I know, family, colleagues, and what I'm hearing a lot is young men who say the role of a man is to provide for his family. What's your take on that?
I do think it is a man's role to provide for his family, but in a family, it's not just his role. Sarah's role is to provide for our family, and together we nurture our child and raise him. I shouldn't have said her name. God damn it. Anyway. And together we raise our child to be the best version of himself that he could be. There's there's more than one way that you can provide for your family. In not working and staying at home and raising your child, you are providing childcare. You are providing your child with lessons. You're providing them with attention. Like there's many different ways you can provide. So I do think that as a parent, it is your job to provide for your family, regardless of sex.
Okay. So then do you think that a real man can be a stay-at-home dad?
Did I not just say that?
I'm kind of... I'm more asking for clarification.
Yes. A real man can be a stay-at-home dad. You could be a top-notch father and not go out and have a job. You can be someone who is worth respect, someone who's worth love, and be someone who just takes care of your kids as someone who has a penis. That is a valid thing you can do.
So I agree with you 100%, and I'm glad that you think that. A lot of men don't think that, right? A lot of men, and this is the line that I hear, is I want to work and make sure that my wife has the choice to work or not, right? I will be the primary breadwinner, and if my wife wants to work, great, she can. But if she doesn't want to work and would rather be, with our children, whatever, she has that option as well. That's something that a lot of men strive for.
Okay, but
and it's almost surfacing. It's almost becoming this thing that is more prominent now than it used to be, and I think that shows in the Trump vote, right? Like, I just think that's our most recent data point in this idea of, men want to be men in the way that Trump talks about masculinity, right? Because Trump talks about it in a very kind of alpha, and the MAGA movement is very traditional, with traditional gender roles. Men do this, women do that, right? and it's like brutal. And I think it's really receding. It's taking us in the wrong direction. It's taking us backwards. Make America Great Again, a time when women did not have the right to vote, a time when women were paid far less than men for the same work, right? That's still an issue, but not nearly as much as it used to be. This MAGA movement is very traditionalist. And again, I know we're not supposed to be talking too much about politics here, but I do think that in America, there has been a kind of a reversal of progress, and that a lot of men now in the United States feel like they need to be the man, the head of the household, and that their wife needs to play a more feminine, traditional mother role. And I think that's a huge problem, and I think that social media is a big part of that.
Sure, I agree with that last part. I completely, well, not completely disagree, but I think your view on what the MAGA movement is trying to do, I think it's completely overblown. I agree that they definitely see things in a more traditional alpha style of manhood, but I don't think they're trying to revert back to a society where women can't vote. I think that's bloody ridiculous. But I want to go back to
Not what I said.
the sentence that you said, where you were talking about, I want my wife to not have to work. Okay, if you could work so that your wife didn't have to, and she could if she wanted to, isn't that the best thing you could do for her? Be so successful that she can make the choice if she wants to be successful or not. Now, I would want that for my wife. If I could make enough money so that she didn't have to work and she could stay at home and choose that life, I would want that. Flip side, she makes more money than I do. Am I okay if she wants, if it's the best thing for our family for me to stay at home and raise our son? I've done it. I'm okay with that. I don't have that problem because she makes enough money for us to do that. Now, the thing that I don't think you're thinking of is I don't think most women want that for their partner. Most women that I've spoken to actually really like being mothers and would rather be the one that gets to take that time off and raise their child than not.
Yeah.
Or stay at home.
And there are certain biological realities to that argument as well, right? Given that women are the ones who carry children, there are certain elements that can't be ignored, right? So I totally hear you. I totally hear you. When a woman is on mat leave, oftentimes she's on preventative leave beforehand. You know, if you're a man-woman couple, the guy is probably making, if we assume he's working full time, I think that's where it comes from. So it makes sense, right? It makes sense in a lot of ways. But I agree with your point that that there should be this flexibility. And I asked myself, like, could I be a stay-at-home dad? Would that be something that would be satisfying to me? And frankly, like, the answer is no. I think part of that is because I have a lot that I want to do in my career, but also because I think that there is a piece of this idea of what it means to be a man, in being the kind of head of the household, provider, hunter, versus gatherer kind of.
Here's the thing. I don't
thing.
think that's it. I don't think it's it. I don't think that's a cultural thing. I think that's a biological thing. I think.
But that exists, right? That exists.
But I think it's on the layer of. I think it's on the layer of we have been that way for so long that is ingrained in the structure of our brain. Men want to go out and do stuff. They want to build stuff. Women far more often are happy to cradle their child and be the one to raise it. It's
a nature versus nurture question.
I think it's a 90-10 thing for nature, personally.
I don't agree with that. There are tons of extremely ambitious
I agree.
women.
I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But every single one of those women, I guarantee you, if they're the ones who grow their own child, they feel a greater attachment, they want to care for that thing more than anything else in the world. And some men, the way they do that is through just providing. And I feel like that's a very, very, very few amount of women who provide for their child by just providing.
If I may, I think that we should maybe try to avoid like making assumptions about what women want. Just given that we're two guys, recording this, and like yeah, like we can certainly make assumptions based on what we understand of masculinity versus femininity for sure. I'm imagining having a woman join this conversation and saying, actually,
Well,
so
I've
let's
spent a
let,
lot of time with my wife, and this is a woman with a master's degree who goes to work every day, is there before most of the people at her work, who's there later than most of the people at her work.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
moment that she started feeling a life growing inside of her, that is the thing that took 100% of that priority. She could care fuck all about her job when it comes to this child growing inside of her. And for men,
look,
as much as
I,
I'm
I'm not at all trying to deny that
so
a woman who is carrying a child has a deep feeling of nurturing and protectiveness for that life growing inside them. I'm not saying that at all. I just think that we let's try to keep it more focused on um, men because we are them.
well, I also agree that is the point of this conversation. I'm just saying I anyway, that belies the point.
Yeah, maybe we can kind of just wrap up with kind of big. You cut out for a second. Can you repeat that?
Oh, I didn't actually say anything. I said let's get back to the main topic, which is
True. Well, I'm
masculinity
happy.
through the
Yeah.
lens of Lord of the Rings.
Um, you ever see those videos where it's like scenes where women in Lord of the Rings talk to each other?
And it's like 30 seconds. Like
Well, some of them are
seconds.
just like the end. There is the only example because the three named characters, female characters, are Galadriel, Eowyn, and Arwen. None of them ever speak to each other. There is that scene when Rohan is burning and the mother puts her two kids on the horse.
That's what I was thinking
But
of.
she talks to the kids, one of them being a girl,
Mm-hmm.
and then the kids ride to Helm's Deep, and there's a brief interaction between the girl and Eowyn.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
The Lord of the Rings is a story for men. Like,
Absolutely.
That's who it was.
You ever like
if you brought up the Boy Scouts in the time that it was written in regards to the fascistic type uprisings that were going on, authoritarianism. I think is a better thing because it could have been, it's not just fascistic; it's also communistic, but not the point. When look at the time that these books are written, it's the same fucking thing. It is just a way to give men a positive role model in life. It's to give you an ideal. It's to give you something to strive for.
Totally.
And that's one of the things that I think why it resonates with me
Yeah.
so much today, and also if you go on the internet, more and more people, is because a lot of those things seem to be on the rise again. Again, you have your white nationalist groups that are growing. You have your anti-fascist groups that are growing. Your jihad movements that are growing around the world. So, I think, things are coming back into a place that I think stories like this and groups like Boy Scouts, minus the molestation, they need to come back into favor, even if it's not in the same iterations. Lord of the Rings, luckily, is a text. We can bring it back. Boy Scouts, it kind of needs a new revival of itself because there's too much of a stain there.
Totally, and not to say that there aren't modern books that are being written now with very, very progressive outtakes on masculinity, but the tide seems to be going in the direction of kind of more traditional masculinity, and I really worry about that because again, like these boys and young men who are consuming media, again specifically social media, that tells them what it is to be a man, that is extremely powerful, and we need to take that more seriously. I think we need to better regulate social media. Like that's a huge part of it. Is that young people, both men, boys, and girls, are being very negatively influenced by what they see on the internet, and it's just like it needs to be. So that's part of it. But also it's conversations, right? And like for me, I try to in some cases with these younger guys, right? These guys who are in their early 20s. I try to have these conversations, right? My cousin recently had his first breakup, his first love, and he split. And he's 20, be 22 very soon. And he and I went out for a coffee afterwards just to kind of chat about it. And I asked him like, "How you doing?" And he's, "Oh yeah, it's good." Like, and I asked him, "Have you cried?" No, I haven't cried. What do you mean you haven't cried? It's your first love. You haven't cried? He's like, "No, I haven't cried." And that kind of worried me. What I did, and this is a weird thing to share in this space, but and this is a few months ago, I was going through a box that I have of these kind of memories. It's birthday and Christmas cards. It's cards past students have written me about stuff. But there's also some stuff from past relationships that I keep in there. And I found a set of letters that I had written to my first girlfriend when we broke up. And the letters were not letters that I sent to her. Do you remember? Maybe we should just have that. But I wrote her a bunch of letters, and
I'll bleep it out for you.
Yeah, if you don't mind. But I wrote these letters, and they were not letters that I intended to send. They were more journal than anything. But they were very real, right? And I read them, and there's a lot of pain in those, right? A lot of emotion. And I wanted to make sure that my cousin understood that it was okay to feel deep emotions, that that's not an unmasculine thing to do. And so I shared the letters with him. I gave him the letters to read, and he read them, and he didn't say much about them, but he seemed to appreciate it based on the way that he thanked me for them. So it's one of those things where I think a big issue that I have with the way that masculinity is understood traditionally is like no emotion, right? To be a tough guy, to tough things out when you are feeling lonely or depressed or sad. It's like it's okay to feel those things. And I myself have internalized certain messages where you're supposed to be this kind of emotionless, solid man who doesn't get rattled by anything. And I'm working to better access my emotions, because I do think that men are not as in touch with emotions, generally speaking, as women are, because it's less stigmatized in among women. So that's something that I hope for men now and men of the future is to be in touch with emotions that are part of the human experience.
I mean, I agree with a lot of that for sure. I cried for hours when my mother passed away. But question, do you think he was lying to you about not crying and just didn't want to say it because of the stigma?
No, I don't think he cried.
You just thought that he just didn't think about it. So there are some aspects to what you're talking about that made me think about, I think the best version of a man not showing emotions is not the brick wall. It's it's a stoic person who is able to bear the brunt of the emotional situation of going on, but then release it all when they're in the comfort of a place that they're okay feeling vulnerable. So like I cried in front of my wife when my mother passed away. At her funeral, I was the person who was the emotional soak for everyone else, where I was able to be there for them and comfort them when she passed away. And then I let it out when I was at home with my wife and I was able to be my most vulnerable. So there's nothing wrong with being someone who's able to not show emotions, but you have to be able to show emotion. Like, you have to be able to show emotions sometimes. And I think there's times when it's important to, and maybe if someone else had been the emotional brick, or whatever metaphor you want to use, in that room, I could have been more vulnerable. But I do think that stoicism is something that is, for the most part, a good thing for specifically men to develop. But that doesn't mean being emotionless.
Why?
That means,
Why?
well, okay, if you look at Lord of the Rings, when everyone's breaking down, and because they just lost Gandalf,
Yeah.
when shit hits the fan, they need to take action. Aragorn, the stoic one, the one who you said is emotionless, he's not emotionless. He's stoic. He holds.
I'm not
it,
saying he's emotionless,
he
but I am saying
experiences
that he
the
keeps his
emotions.
emotions very closely guarded.
Right. He holds them in for when he is no longer needed to be the rock. When he takes them, he's the one who says, we need to get going. Shit's happening. Orcs are coming out of that fucking cave. We got birds flying overhead that are tracking us from Saruman. Like, we need to be on the move. You need someone in situations like that. Now, that's not every situation, but there's situations like a funeral, like a car accident. Could you imagine if you're an ambulance driver and you come upon a car accident and there's a dead baby? You can't just break down crying. You have to save the rest of the people that are still savable. So you do need to be able to hold that in sometimes. Like, stoicism is an important thing in certain situations, but not everyone lives in situations that.
But how does stoicism relate to masculinity is my question. I'm not arguing that there are times where you need to be strong for other people. My question to you is, why is it that men need to be the stoic ones? Yeah, someone in that scene after Gandalf falls, someone has to rally the troops. And you're right, everyone else, the other 8 who got out of what's it called?
Moria.
And
the Balrog.
Yeah. That's not never mind. That's not what we're talking.
The reason that it needs to be
the man. Do a Lord of the Rings. We should just change this podcast into nerd shit.
Lord of the Rings all the time, like our Avatar podcast.
Yeah.
The reason that it needs to be the man, in my opinion, is that if you look and you did a statistical analysis, more than 9 times out of 10, I think it would be a man that would rise up in those situations.
Yeah, but why does it have to be?
I don't think it has to be, but I think statistically that would be the case.
Yeah, of course.
And therefore, if men should be able to do that when it is called upon them, as should women. But this is a podcast where currently we're talking about the fact that men are in crisis. Boys are young.
You're not offering any good reason.
55-year-old men are not in crisis. It's like 13 through 25. Maybe even 35.
Yeah, let me tell you right now, a lot of men our age are in crisis.
And while I don't, like I said, I'm a fairly progressive person in my views. Clearly, I might be right wing, but you've heard a lot of the things that I've said. There are certain aspects.
You have interesting views.
Many of the things that have pushed me to becoming the best man that I can be are traditional things. I go to work every day and I work hard and it's an important part of my life, but I also come home and I'm married and I have a son, which means I have a family, and those are very traditional things. Like the family unit is not something that you hear progressives talking about that often, unless it's with regards to economics. And
yeah, I agree with you.
It's a culture thing, and I think the world needs to get back to a culture of that. But part of the problem is there's 2 things. Well, there's many things, but men aren't rising. Women are the ones who set standards for sex. The problem is men aren't rising to the occasion, and so you're having a problem where men just aren't procreating or even fornicating, and when men aren't procreating or fornicating, they do things like raid villages. But today, the best way to raid villages is to smoke a bunch of drugs and then play computer games. It's called the male sedation hypothesis.
Or go online and go into comments of,
And
you
shit
know,
talk people.
women celebrities and tell them that they're, they and say the most vile imaginable things.
Sure, yeah. I don't disagree. Back in the day, there's a reason that we used to send the second and third born sons to war, where the firstborn son used to stay home and rule the country. Because the second and third born sons would cause a lot of chaos if they didn't go out and either conquer more land where they can be the ruler or the, like, sub ruler, or they die, right?
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah, you either getting rid of your competition as the oldest brother. Why wouldn't you want that? You get the land, the money, the women. They get battle scars if they survive.
Badass shit.
Anyway.
Yeah. Look, this has been a good conversation. Enjoyed talking about this, and as it is something that I think about, and this is probably the first real conversation that I've had about it. A lot of it is just kind of like in my head, and I feel like I need to be better at articulating my views on what is happening to young men in today's society. But I do worry. I am sincerely worried about where we're going, and I need, and I think that we should be thinking more openly about what kind of solutions are available to reverse this trend. Culture, politics, bit of a chicken and an egg. It is a kind of a cyclical thing. But yeah, young men and boys need to be I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Need to be free to become whatever version of themselves they feel is the best version, without being tormented. But just
and I thought I was the one who was high.
Yeah, I'm trying to summarize my entire point, and it is not working. But this idea of there's one way to be a man, and it's this way, is a serious problem, and we need to convey to men that there are a lot of different ways to be a man. And so long as you are someone who is participating actively in society, who's contributing to your community, contributing to your family in whatever form that takes, I think that's what being a man is.
Yeah, I agree with that, for sure. When I talk about Aragorn as the masculinity, I don't necessarily mean his actions. I don't necessarily mean his profession choices. I'm most referring to the character of the person, And if you take those characters and you put them in almost every situation, whether that be a stay-at-home dad or someone who works at home, there's many different ways that you can imbue those good qualities that end up with different situations for you to be in, like being a stay-at-home father.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. Before we go, I would like, what are your top 3 non-Lord of the Rings related tonic masculinity characters?
Tonic masculinity characters.
Yes, the opposite of toxic. Tonic, like a cure.
Tonic. Okay, well, let's go back and forth. Let's do one, because I can't think of 3 immediately off the top of my head, and they cannot be Lord of the Rings. You say?
Stay away from Lord of the Rings.
Okay, got it.
Any J.R.R. Tolkien. No Hobbit. No Silmarillion.
Okay, here's one: Tyrion Lannister.
Okay, why?
Why? Because he is, in a world of warriors, he is an intellectual. He is one who does not just follow this traditional idea because he can't. He's a dwarf. But he says, my mind is my weapon. And I think that's a beautiful idea, because what he said was, I am finding ways to contribute in the ways that I know how, not in the ways that I'm told how to do it.
Okay. My choice is an easy, obvious one for number 1. It's General Iroh. He imbues the best aspects of not
Yeah.
just masculinity, but any character. He's compassionate, he's strong, so he's able to defend himself, and he's loving, you know, he's wise. You know, if everyone if everyone made Iroh proud, the world would be a better place.
That's good. Okay. Oh my goodness. Who to choose? Forrest Gump.
Oh, that's a really good choice.
Forrest Gump is just trying to be the best he can be in a world that he does not understand. He is unabashedly in love with Jenny, unconditionally in love with Jenny.
To a fault.
Sorry?
To a fault.
To a fault.
Should have drawn
but
her
he,
like a... Anyway.
But basically he says, you know, I want to be with you no matter what. Eventually Jenny has the kid, dies, and Forrest Gump ends up as a stay-at-home father, right? Who's got tons of money because I think he invested in Apple or something. But Forrest Gump's life becomes taking care of his son.
Yeah, it's that's one of those movies that's just fucking beautiful.
So good.
I remember one of the first times I saw my dad cry was we'd watched that movie. It wasn't because of that movie. We had anyway. There was a funeral that day, but not the point. I just remember the linking of those two things: seeing my father cry in Forrest Gump. I'm having.
What else you got?
I'm trying to think. This is a much more obscure reference. No, you know what? I'm going to go with something a little less obscure, and then we'll go more obscure for number 3. Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise.
Which one is he? Is he the Doctor?
No, he's...
Oh, Picard.
From Next Generation.
Show?
Yes, from Next Generation, not the original series.
Right.
The original series is, you know, I love it, but it's a tad outdated. No, Captain Picard is intelligent, he's well-read, he's commanding, but he's caring. You know, he has his faults, which every character needs faults. But he's someone who is able to take command of the situation, but also give command of the situation to someone else if he needs to. So he's willing to rely on others from the team that he's assembled for himself. He is not willing to... he's willing to show his emotions when he needs to, and is just a great example of a really cool character, and one from an age group that you typically don't see, which is bald 50-plus-year-old men being the badass character. I mean, nowadays it's a lot more common, but you don't typically think of most, like, cool... Nowadays it's much more common because people like Vin Diesel, but, like, it's not the same. Patrick Stewart is not the same as Vin Diesel when it comes to masculinity. It's a much different kind of masculinity, right? Vin Diesel is the alpha that you're talking about. Maybe not Vin Diesel himself, I'm sorry, I don't know you, but most of your characters.
Vin Diesel's gay.
Is he?
Yep.
Well, you could still be toxically masculine and be gay. Lots of gay people have terrible personalities. That's just part of being a human.
Just throwing that out there, eh?
Yeah, lots of straight people are terrible. Like, everyone can be terrible.
Like, throwing that
There's
out there.
Point. Equality. There's tons of shitty people on all sides. Yeah, no, I think Captain Jean-Luc Picard is a great masculine character who has the traits of not just being strong, being compassionate, wise, and caring. Those are some of the most important things to being a man in by my measure.
Totally. I've been trying to think of one while you've been talking, and no, because I'm trying to think of like big movies that everyone will know, and this is specifically like I can't say like Barack Obama.
No, fictional.
They have to be fictional?
Yes.
Okay, Barack Obama, who's based on I
don't think Barack Obama's that great of a person. I've heard a lot of terrible things that he's ways that he's screwed over people in his past.
I'm sure you have, you Democrat-hating motherfucker.
Hey, look, man, I wanted Andrew Yang to win in 2020, so you can't fucking say that I won't support Democrats.
You just picked like the one that's got no shot, and then it's like, look, see,
Andrew Yang was
I
taking
know
more
your spiel
percentage
about
of
it.
people away from Donald Trump than any other candidate except Bernie Sanders. If he would have went to the general, all the Democrats would have voted for him, and a bunch of people that voted for Trump
That's
in
what
2016.
everyone says about every candidate who didn't win.
No,
it's
it's a
like, oh, they definitely would have won.
Well, it's a counterfactual.
I'm a big Andrew Yang fan. I'm a big Andrew Yang fan. I'm gonna argue with you.
Good.
But I'm just saying that you can't prove a hypothetical that will never come to pass.
I can make a case for it, though. I can't prove it.
You can make a case for it, though, and I'd say never happened. Okay, my third one is going to be Morpheus from The Matrix.
Nice.
The reason for this is because Morpheus is misunderstood originally, where everyone is telling Neo that Morpheus is a terrorist, that Morpheus is the most dangerous man alive. That's what Smith tells him. And then Neo meets Morpheus and discovers that he is actually an extremely kind, compassionate, and capable leader who shows him the path, right? He is the guide who ultimately brings Neo to his discovery of being the one, and his absolute faith in something, right? He believes in Neo, even when the Oracle tells Neo that he's not the one. Morpheus says, she told you exactly what you needed to believe, or she tells Neo exactly what he needed to hear. And Morpheus says, not even that can shake me, right? So he is someone who I think is just so profoundly dedicated to a purpose. Again, Morpheus has this singular purpose, and I agree with you. I just don't think it's isolated to men. I think all people need purpose. And I think that in the case of Morpheus, he is someone who is so unwaveringly dedicated to that purpose that nothing can convince him otherwise. And ultimately, you know, he turns out to be right. So Morpheus from The Matrix.
That's a great one. And you actually... I'm not going to phrase it that way. Anyway, my choice, and this is from the greatest movie of all time. Nick, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, you might be picking the wrong person. Ellis Redding from The Shawshank Redemption. Morgan Freeman in that movie plays that character so perfect. Red is a man who made many mistakes in his life and does everything in his power to make up for them in the only way that he can. And he's a kind person. He's not a man who shows the outward masculinity that you typically see, or is in many of our previous choices, you know. Actually, mostly my choices. No, you had Morpheus. Anyway, yeah. I think he exemplifies everything in a subtle way of what masculinity is. He's the Rock in many situations, you know, that they're put in the movie when things are emotional, and he's able to be self-sacrificial. That's one of the things about Morpheus that I 100% agree with you on. His self-sacrificialness, it makes him a extremely good male role model. I think that's an important part of being a man.
Can I add something about Red?
Please do.
Because I love this example, and I love the character. He's also someone who is so he's curious, right? He's actually very open to learning. When Andy Dufresne shows up at Shawshank, he totally changes Red's life, right? Where Red all of a sudden is working in the library, right? And he's learning all these things from Andy. He's asking questions. He's not this kind of, again, this grandstanding character who pretends to have all the answers, right? I think he's very openly willing to admit the things he doesn't know. And I think that this is most obvious when he goes into the room with the people who decide whether you get to get out,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, "Do you feel you have been rehabilitated?" And he said, "You know what? I don't know what the fuck that means."
He doesn't drop an F-bomb,
but you're right. But basically, he's someone, and I love this about the character, who does not need to be the biggest man in the room, right? He is a leader kind of by default, and you can see at the very beginning of the movie that he is the head of that group.
Well, the others look up to him. In fact, the way that they frame them in the shot, he's kind of like an apex, a pyramid of all the other guys.
Yeah. But it's not because he's the loudest or the strongest or the toughest, right? It's because he's someone who is wise, right, and who is thoughtful and caring, and people are drawn to that in every setting, right, even in prison. And I think that Andy
like
kind of takes over. Andy kind of takes over that group, but ultimately Red is someone who I think retains all the qualities that we love about him. And that scene at the end where they embrace on the beach is so beautiful, right? It's another example of like brotherly love between two characters who just come to be like brothers.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about that movie in the way is that it's a place that most of the people don't have what I've been preaching a lot of this time, which is they don't have an adventure. Most of those guys are older guys, so you'll be on a different adventure when you're older, but that's not the point. Young men are the ones who I think need adventures the most. But there is no adventure in prison. You're locked in, and you can't. You have to go through spiritual or intellectual adventures, and Red does that in the movie. His philosophy in life evolves. At the beginning, he's playing checkers with Andy,
and he's cynical. That's right. He's very cynical.
And he also doesn't. He doesn't want to learn chess because it's a complete fucking mystery. I think he says. What was it at the end? I don't think he learns how to play chess, but as you said, he's much more curious, and he's also a very giving person. He's a man of service in that. In that prison, he provides for people. Yeah, he charges them, but he still provides for them. He's the one who gets them stuff, and he also gives it away to Andy when he needs it.
I'm the man who knows how to get things.
You're the man who knows how to get things? That's interesting. We'll talk after.
Yeah. Yeah. Andy Dufresne came to me and asked me for Rita Hayworth, and I said, no problem.
Yeah.
All right. That's good.
Movie. If you have the chance, pick up Lord of the Rings at your nearest book outlet or on Amazon. I'm not being paid. It's just that fucking good. And
you don't need to read The Hobbit.
The Hobbit
just start with
a great
Fellowship.
Story. And The Hobbit
is fine, but it's not necessary.
The Hobbit is an example of that which I'm preaching, which young men need an adventure. And
all right, we're done.
Goes
it's over.
On an adventure, and he becomes a man.
Yes.
I'm going to wrap this up with the end because it's my fucking podcast. I'm kidding. You talked about the hobbits as children, and I know you said, not here but talking to each other, that the scouring of the Shire was, just kind of a waste at the end. I don't think that's how you worded it, but I think that it is a great way to show that the hobbits have grown into real men. You say they left as children, and at some point they become men, but it is that whole chapter is showing off that they are the ones who can lead now because they have learned those lessons from other great men who led them. Gandalf, Aragorn, Theoden, not Denethor. Every time my son eats tomatoes, I get this vision of Denethor, and I hate it. When he's biting the tomato. Anyway, that's it. We're done for today. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. Take care, Nicholas. We'll see you next month, where, unless an election starts in the new year, my plan is I'm going to interview in January, and then in February, you're going to interview me.
Okay. But we will need to talk about Canadian politics very soon, as 2025 is going to be a big year in Canadian politics.
That's on the docket, Nicholas. Don't you worry. I just think that this will be
Yeah.
interesting. Take care, everyone.
Cool.